After decades of flat energy demand, something nobody saw coming just shattered every projection: AI and data centers. Bloomberg revised load growth upward by 36% in a single update. But this isn't just about building more server farms. It's about watching an entire industry build the plane while flying it. Tech giants who can wire continents don't understand substations. Real estate developers are Googling interconnection queues. Renewable companies are chasing projects where one data center pulls as much power as Denver. And utilities are in heated battles over who pays for hundreds of millions in grid updates. Everyone's hunting for that rare site where power, land, and connectivity align. But most never find it. This old playbook is dead, and nobody knows what comes next. Today, on What Matters, we're tackling the data center Goldrush and what it means for the future of energy development. To help us unpack what's happening and why it matters so much for developers, utilities, and clean energy, I'm joined by Jake Anderson from PVcase. Jake heads up the PVcase Prospect business unit there. But before that, he founded Anderson Optimization and sold it to PVcase in 2023, which became what's now the PVcase Prospect solution. So he's been right at the center of how power, land, and infrastructure decisions are evolving in real time, and he's got a unique perspective on where all of this is heading. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Anna. Really looking forward to being here.
Jake, for listeners who may not know you, can you introduce yourself and what you focus on day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jake Anderson. I am, my title here at PVcase is Head of Business. Essentially, I oversee our entire prospecting business unit. So that is our business unit focused on our site selection software, helping identify good locations for energy-connected project assets. And I generally oversee the macro business plan across product, commercial, customer success, and really kind of set that overall trajectory, strategy, and execution for that entire business unit. And as this data center industry has really taken off, a big part of my focus has been figuring out where we play, how to help that industry segment grow, and really kind of helping to go to market there.
Yeah, you really sit in an interesting intersection, which is exactly where these conversations are heading. So what does your role look like in practice, and who are you spending most of your time talking to? Developers, utilities, data center teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role, I'd say, kind of has a mix of both internal and external, and trying to kind of bridge that gap from what's happening in the market and bringing that back into our internal strategy to drive it forward. So internally, the people I most interact with are on our commercial side, our sales teams and our customer success teams, to make sure that what we're hearing from the industry in terms of the solutions, features, and capabilities our software needs to deliver in order to meet those needs, that we're actually supporting that properly, selling the right messages, and really focusing on those. And then I also spend a lot of time with product, really helping to figure out where those gaps are, what else do we have to build that we have not built yet, what are we doing really well so that we can double down on that. So really kind of working both on the commercial side as well as the product side to really make sure. And then externally, where a lot of that insight comes from is, we really are talking across the wide variety of spectrum. So project developers are always one of our most common target markets and industries we focus a lot, but we also a big part, and we'll talk about this quite a bit today, focus a lot on the power side of project development, not just the land side. So we work with companies focused on grid modeling, ISOs or grid operators, as well as, too, we do have a big emphasis on the land side, since most of these projects, whether they're data centers, renewables, or otherwise, have a big land focus. So we talk to a lot of companies too, really focused on that side. So yeah, kind of a lot of different parties. And then my whole job is to really help kind of consolidate that into a singular vision to help us guide forward.
That's great. And I'm very curious, how did solar and renewables become part of your journey?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. So candidly, I had no energy background prior to starting my company, what was formerly known as Anderson Optimization, which we sold to PVcase in 2023, which is now essentially the PVcase Prospect business unit. So the way I got into it was I had always wanted to start my own company. And around that time, my cousin, who happened to be my co-founder, he's also a PVcase here as a principal engineer. He was getting his PhD in what's called energy system modeling, which is a very technical jargon. But basically, he was kind of helping to simulate the energy grid because it's a lot more complex these days. Data centers are a good example why. Things that big didn't used to exist. So he was looking at better ways, and he was also starting to kind of think about wanting to start a company specific into that space. And so we got to talking, and, I'm more of a business guy. He's more of a builder engineer guy, and said, hey, he said, I really want to do something in energy, solar, renewables. I said, I'm pretty topic agnostic, but I want to run a company and, effectively be the CEO. And he said, I have zero interest in that part of it. So it was a really good match. And then, we kind of spent a good year plus kind of researching the industry, looking for problems. And just kept hearing how much of a pain site selection was. And then we were kind of off to the races since it really dovetailed well with some of his PhD work.
Amazing. So I wanted to know from your vantage point, what are the biggest trends and bottlenecks you're seeing across the industry right now?
Absolutely. So, especially specific to data centers, the biggest thing that I would say is kind of the catch all problem that impacts everything is a scale problem. The rate at which data centers driven by the AI boom that is happening right now are trying to be deployed into both land and the grid is just completely unprecedented. Over the past 10, 20 years, honestly, projections for energy usage or load had generally been projecting it pretty flat. And then AI kind of comes not out of nowhere. It's been in the works for a while, but really kind of hit a certain exponential point. And so now there is this big effort to get as much data center and computation onto and deployed as possible. But the pace at which that is happening, these are really, really large scale energy connected assets. And there is just a whole lot of work that takes to really kind of deploy it. So it kind of creates this whole domino effect of independent kind of discrete challenges of how do you do these activities and solve these problems at scale to deliver kind of what the industry is looking for at this large piece. So everyone's kind of trying to figure out how do we, 5x, 10x, et cetera, what they used to be doing. I talked to a data center company the other day, a pretty prominent one, and they had recently gotten some funding, and they said, previously over the past decade, we were expected to deploy like X millions per year. And now with this new capital raise, our new capital partner said we need to change the M's to B's, basically saying from X millions per year to X billions per year, which is just a whole different level to kind of help speak to that scale of difference in a very rapid time frame.
Yeah, I agree. It really stands out to me as you say that this isn't just growth, it's really an unprecedented growth. And as you know, for decades, utilities planned around relatively flat load forecasts, as you were saying. And now we've seen those demand curves bend sharply outwards. And obviously, it's all largely driven by AI and data centers.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Exactly. And it creates kind of these, specific challenges along the way where it's, scale really breaks down then into a kind of a variety of different areas.
Yeah. But I'm also hearing is that grid operators are now revising load forecasts multiple times a year. So this is also something that was almost never happened before.
Yeah, exactly. That's completely right. And load projections have always been there. And, but I know when we started this industry, I remember reading a lot of industry collateral, and a lot of it was talking about like, generation growing really fast with renewables, et cetera, but load is projected to stay reasonably flat. And that is just not the case as of today, where even just the other day, I know Bloomberg had updated some projections of, even their very aggressive projections as of very recently are now like 40% underwater and actually significantly higher. So pretty much every day you're hearing about new expansions to what previously was already a very rapid accelerating curve.
For sure. We'll see where this takes us. Now, you've said that the scale problem actually breaks down into a few very specific challenges. Can you walk us through some of those and why power has become the dominant one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. And that is right. It's scale kind of makes everything challenging. And so when we kind of are talking to the industry and really talking to these data center developers, the hyperscalers, the land companies, the renewable companies, there's kind of a few key things we hear about when we hear about good projects. And generally for a good data center project, you kind of need three big things. You need land, you need connectivity, which would be basically, you got to get into the internet to make these data centers useful. It'd be a little, not the most useful data center if you weren't connected to that side. And then, of course, the power side, which is the big bottleneck in the room. And so we'll speak to that one last, because as you mentioned, that is, when you talk to anyone in the space right now, that is the common refrain. Nothing else matters if you don't have power. But from a land perspective, basically these companies, especially on the data center side, the volume that they were doing was such that, they could maybe just meet a landowner, or some people would reach out that had land and say, hey, have a spot, looks like a data center opportunity here. Do you like it? And kind of sift through and be able to kind of meet their quota of how many data centers they had to deploy for their business. But right now, with both this scale happening, the inbound amount of volume they're getting of people saying, hey, can we put a data center here, as well as what they are contracted to with their capital partners to have to go find, that just sort of kind of picking away one by one as a potential opportunity comes up just does not hit this scale. So all of these companies are scrambling to just say, how do I even find enough land to actually get to these large scale data centers at scale? So there's this land problem. And the connectivity one is, I'd say it's a very big symptom of what makes a good project, but that one's in a way somewhat the most straightforward. I would say in terms of the scale, it's still just you have to make sure that you are looking at it constantly and making sure you are staying to the net connectivity. But there haven't been as many changes, I would say, on that kind of pillar. But the biggest one, as you properly stated, is power. And to just kind of put in perspective, like how grid intensive these projects are. So, you'll hear Sam Altman or some of the big names in AI talking about like, oh yeah, we're just going to go put up like a 500 gigawatt data center. And if you're an energy person, you kind of hear that and or excuse me, a 500 megawatt, and you hear that and you're just like, easier said than done. Just to put in perspective, that's like the size of the entire city of Denver in terms of annual energy usage. And the way the grid works, to kind of keep it simple for people who aren't, as familiar, like think of the electricity grid as a whole series of water pipes. You can really only put so much water through a pipe. You can only put so much energy through the grid, whether you're putting it on or pulling it off. So if you just all of a sudden add the city of Denver at one, think of it an outlet in your house, in the same way that if you have too many, your toaster, your hair iron, all going at once, it breaks. The macro electricity grid is the same way. So when you just add the city of Denver at one outlet, again, I'm being a little simplified here, the whole system kind of breaks. And so to really model and plan for this, it really requires this very, very advanced type of modeling that's called power flow modeling, basically simulating the actual physics of the grid to know where it goes, where will it break. And the whole grid has to be constantly in balance or else the whole thing breaks and there's blackouts. So it really takes a serious amount of time and a very, very precise level of accuracy to make sure it's done right. And that's what the grid operators and the utilities are doing. But when you have these data center companies who are now tasked with putting up tens, hundreds of these in a very rapid time frame, the grid is just under siege at a level that it never has been. And then when you couple that with the other side, with generation, where the renewable queues are so backed up, the grid is just changing at a rate that has never, ever been seen. And so these data center companies are trying to get ahead of this to really figure out, okay, like where can I actually get power to put, again, potentially the city of Denver at a singular output, and how much is that going to cost? Because no matter what, you are going to incur some cost to do that to kind of help fix the breakages that causes. And so it's just a very tricky problem that these companies have never traditionally had to deal with at this type of scale.
Yeah, I really like that water pipe analogy. I think it's a very clear way to explain, and then put in the city of Denver in place as well is a little more visual for the audience.
Yeah, for me as a non-technical person, those were the two analogies that always kind of helped make it click for me. It's like, yeah, put the city of Denver through like your at-home outlet and it just doesn't work. And again, I'm overly simplifying it, but to provide a mental picture.
Exactly. So I guess from your point of view, given how hard it is to line up all of these things that you mentioned, the land, the power, the connectivity, how would you say companies that are trying to find that diamond in the rough?
I mentioned a little bit where, the traditional method that these companies were doing this was really just, there was enough companies reaching out to them saying like, hey, here's a potential project opportunity. Do you like it or not? And that was good. But that really just hasn't met the scale. And so what a lot of these companies are doing is starting to transition to what's been done candidly in the renewable sector for quite a while, which is more of this, what's called like a greenfielding or a prospecting approach, which is somewhat of the inverse, which is really the data center companies saying, okay, I know I need these three things: power, land, connectivity. Let's actually get information on where those things all exist and kind of triangulate based on that where we should go be hunting. And let's go actually be more of these active participants to go actually find these sites rather than just kind of waiting for them to come to us. Easier said than done then is, okay, well, how do you actually get the information on those three things? And so, that's candidly where we're talking with a lot of companies, because that's something we at PVcase have really been doing in our prospecting for a while, was especially given our backing in renewables of how do you line up these different pieces into a very automated fashion. So generally the kind of cycle that we're seeing most companies in this data center space on is there's sort of three phases. Phase one, they just need to actually have the information that they've never had, kind of like those three big buckets. And then they need to put a process around it or a solution that allows them to kind of get through this inbound volume that scale is kind of inundating them with. And then once they kind of have their feet under them with that, then it's okay, now we need to start transitioning to this more outward approach so that we can kind of go find these, yeah, diamonds in the rough. The thing we hear all the time is like all of the perfect opportunities are kind of gone. So it's you need to kind of have a nice framework where you can very quickly evaluate trade offs, find the opportunities, and be able to, if you find something good, move on them quickly because everybody is looking for similar types of opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah, it feels like it's finding the needle in the haystack, and if you find it, you better grab it and act on it fast.
Yes,
And
exactly.
do you think this reactive sort of inbound heavy model changes, or is the industry forced to rethink how it's going to source its opportunities?
I think definitely companies that are only relying on an inbound approach, I would be surprised if they're able to keep up with, I'd say, where a lot of the more advanced companies are that are, like I mentioned, kind of shifting towards this more greenfielding method. And again, every company has a different strategy. If you're a smaller player, you're trying to only put up a couple, you might be able to get by. But if you're really trying to kind of play in this game where it's getting very competitive, there's new entrants all of the time, transitioning to something more outbound. And I think even the companies that have done some level of outbound, I think even there, when we're talking to them more and more on a daily basis, they're saying, you know, we've been doing some level of greenfielding or prospecting, but again, that was maybe getting us one project every X time frame. And now we have to do 5 projects every X time frame. So that either means we hire a whole bunch more people, which is expensive, or we need some sort of solutions, platforms, tools, process improvements to do it. And so, again, those are where a lot of the conversations we're having is helping companies do that since we really have an industry track record of kind of being a best practice at how to do this type of site selection.
And related to what you just said, so I guess how does the work or your work at PVcase fit into the new reality, especially the idea of power first development?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's something where, when Eric, my cousin, and I were like first starting, AO, and now with PVcase, the thing we talk about all the time is like we want to be the end-to-end platform. And I think when we looked at kind of the whole site selection or just general project development market is most solutions or processes really focus on a singular piece. And I would say most really lead with land. And even us, when we started with land. It's the most straightforward. There's a lot more data. There's a lot more information on it. But we always knew, especially with my cousin's background in the grid modeling space, we really knew that was ultimately going to be the bottleneck. So we started from our very early days really researching and building solutions that allowed us to do the exact same type of modeling that the grid operators do. Back when we started, and even today, like the way that that type of analysis has been done is with consultants. And these consultants take weeks and weeks to deliver a single study for a single point of interest. So we really kind of said, hey, how can we kind of disrupt that? Bring in this exact same type of modeling, softwareize it, if you will, and really allow people to have this more at their fingertips. So we've really kind of gone and done the work to actually do the exact same type of grid modeling that consultants do, which is the exact same type of modeling that the grid operators do when they evaluate the project. And we really democratize that information. And we've always built our platform to be, we always say we're a site selection platform, we're not a data platform. And what we mean by that is the whole idea is we're trying to automate the workflows while also providing the data. I think a lot of other companies, they say, hey, here's the data, now you have to go make it work. But with that scale problem, if you just have information, you're still having to do all of your analysis completely manually, you really kind of hit a ceiling of how efficient you can be. Whereas for us, we really brought in all 3 of those pieces, the connectivity, the land, and the power in particular, and built some really nice automations to be able to do that triangulation we've been talking about in really a matter of minutes, even if you are not a electrical grid expert.
That's really good to hear and very valuable. What's interesting is that this power first thinking has been a standard for generation side for years, but now the data centers are also being forced into that side of the same discipline.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something too that's been really interesting for us is, I think traditionally when you were to think about a data center market, you really think of it as like a commercial real estate or like an industrial type of asset, similar to like a manufacturing facility or like a commercial or a shopping mall as an example. But with the scale of the size of these now, they're much more like energy connected assets. Yeah, they're pulling energy rather than putting it onto the grid. But that was like a big learning for us was just how similar this data center process really is from what the energy folks have been doing for a while here.
We've gone from renewables, battery and storage, and now data centers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I always still think to myself, I've been doing this now for what, 7 years or so. And every time I kind of think I have my head around it, there's some new shift. But it is interesting where there's a lot of new stuff, but also a lot of similarities as well. At the end of the day, if you're trying to connect something to the grid, like there are certain best practices and the power flows and the energy markets are always going to be critically important.
So there's been talk about this boom for a while now. Are you seeing any signs of it slowing, or is it still accelerating, would you say?
So from our point of view, it is definitely still accelerating. Like by the day, we are still talking to more and more companies. The volume continues to be going on an upward trajectory. All the projections you're seeing for most of the industry analysts, if you will, all still seem to be presenting an upward curve. So, and even when we talk to these companies, like I said, everyone's on that evolution of kind of where they are in terms of improving their process. And most of the companies I'd say we talk to are still on more of the simplistic form of process or the earlier side. So from our point of view, it really does seem like it is continuing to grow pretty rapidly. Realistically, there probably is a point where it starts to taper off like everything, where it's just that scale, there is a certain amount of, bottleneck you ultimately run into, similar to what we're seeing in renewables, honestly, right now. But right now, it does kind of feel like a bit of a gold rush of, lots of demand. Go try to meet that demand as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, that some of the estimates that are were coming from a year or even a few months ago are now put growth even tenths of a percentage higher than the previous projections.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was Bloomberg just a day or so ago had the 36% upward tick on their most recent projection, which was also still very recent.
Hmm.
Everything you're seeing is, generally projecting on an upward curve, even from these already pretty bullish estimates that we've had as of late.
And so beyond demand itself, what macro factors are shaping this, especially around policy or who pays for the infrastructure?
So the biggest thing is, really the policy side of all of this because of the scale. And this kind of once again ties to this macro challenge of scale of, you know, we are seeing bigger data centers than have ever been built. Again, literally the size and energy usage of a Denver trying to just plug into the grid, and also the speed of them, where it really puts a very heavy strain on the grid. So grid operators are really trying to react to these changes in real time while also still being able to kind of service that industry in the way that it is trying to. And so you're seeing a lot of different policy changes. And I would say there's a couple. There's one that's from an economic side, which is to me is one of the most interesting question marks of the whole AI boom is, and what's what I call who foots the bill at scale. Anything else in the world, if I don't want to eat Taco Bell, I just don't buy Taco Bell, and I don't have to subsidize that. Whereas because these are energy assets and we all partake in the energy system, the energy markets, utility rates, etc., if you just go put Denver into a singular point on the grid, that increases demand exponentially, as you can imagine, which increased demand equals increased price. So there's sort of this societal cost that goes along with these data centers from the AI boom that there's a bit of a question mark who really should own this, because traditionally that would, if it was just like a manufacturing facility, the old way was, that all just kind of dispersed through the ratepayer and it was fairly negligible, but it is not so much with these data centers. So it is starting to become a question. I think it was AEP, actually, pretty big utility out in the kind of mid-Atlantic. They actually put out a new policy change that basically, oversimplifying here, but more or less said that if a data center goes in and increases rates, basically the data center company has to foot the bill for the entire rate increase so that constituents are net neutral from that project, which again, that's a massive cost. And these AI companies are already bleeding cash pretty consistently. So when we talk about kind of this growth, that is definitely a question mark. And then you're seeing the other piece in places like SPP or ERCOT and a couple others as well about, again, on an economic side, but not so much the rates, but actually the, you know, addressing and fixing the grid. Like I said, traditionally with commercial real estate type of projects, like a shopping mall, generally that cost just sort of got dispersed through society as a ratepayer. But on the renewables side, for example, you break the grid, pay to upgrade it. And the terms were a little looser because there hasn't been traditionally much on the load side. And so there's some more stringent rules, I guess is the easiest way to put it, in terms of a you break it, you buy it type of approach where, hey, you put in a data center, you foot this whole bill. And there is, in my mind, if I were to, put into a crystal ball, there will be some sort of, big conversation about all of the economics of these. But yeah, all of the grid operators are trying to figure out this in real time. And the last piece is just the waiting list, if you will. On the generation side, there's what's called the interconnection queue. There's a very formal waiting room, if you will, for projects to get into the grid. Never needed to be one on the load side back in the day. There just wasn't like this kind of consistent volume. But now with the data center boom, a lot of them are starting to talk about creating formalized load queues the same way we have for generation, because it is really the Wild West right now. So yeah, a lot of policy changes around the grid to meet this new demand we're seeing.
So, we're saying, I think this is where things get contentious. I mean, when a single facility draws as much power as a mid-sized city, then traditional cost-sharing models just definitely break down. So I'm curious where all the utilities end up.
Yeah, exactly. Just it is an interesting one, because if you don't really know energy, like there's no way you would really know, like, wait, my utility bill is going to skyrocket because insert tech company X just built this huge data center up the road from my town. Like connecting those dots is a little more opaque unless you live in this industry day in and day out. So to me, that's, just as kind of an energy nerd and interested in this industry, definitely to me, the biggest question of how that one resolves. Yeah, you can't just opt out the way you would from seeing a movie or, going out to a restaurant. So it will be interesting to see.
And you mentioned before the data center bubble. Now I know there's a lot of growing chatter around that. And what's your take on that?
Yes, the AI bubble question. I'd say anyone who is pretending that they know the answer definitively is, I don't think anyone knows for sure. I think it's fun though to have a take. So I think kind of where I land is, I think there are bits and pieces like AI at the end of the day, like that technology, Pandora is out of the box. AI in some form or fashion is here to stay. It's just too powerful of a technology to just evaporate overnight. And I think there are a lot of good use cases. And the way I've kind of framed it is, I think where again, this is just one take, so take it for what it's worth, is, I generally feel that AI has been generally a bit better at doing things than knowing things. And so what I mean by that is, like, where I see the bubble is like within LLMs. I think you're seeing LLMs for everything. And like, they really have a pretty defined use case, honestly, in terms of what they really do well. And in the same way, in like the 2010s, there was like an Uber for everything. Right now, there kind of feels like there's an LLM for everything and chatbots all over. And, pretty much all of the initial results of like implementing those at scale has not totally proven tons of value. Of course, there's your chat GPTs and some really large ones doing search quite well, but some of those other use cases to me feel a little fuzzy. However, things like doing things, I think AI is really good at. If you talk to literally like any software engineer out there, they've all said, hey, using the AI oriented, software development tools is exponentially faster and increasing productivity. So I think just this idea that we're going to like outsource knowledge to the machine is still a ways off, and they're just wrong so often that it's going to kind of not end up being worth it. But when it comes to like, hey, here are some really innovative tools that can do some pretty powerful things really quickly, like I don't see that going away. So that's my take. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know that anyone has a perfect answer on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it feels like one of those moments where the technology is clearly real, but the shape of the market is still quite uncertain.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, exactly. And to me, like, there is this economic one of just like the whole who foots the bill, because right now, like, these companies are bleeding insane amounts of money. And at a certain point, the private equity behind it all is not going to want to do that the same way, like the 2010s, the Uber for everything, when these companies. So when they have to go like turn the dial to actually make money on this, like, and people have to pay what it actually costs, I'm curious to see if like that slightly better Google search as an example, which is like where a societal really pays out. Whereas again, if I'm a software engineer and I'm 10xing my productivity, there's a nice value there. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I like the way you frame it. The shape of it is, that's a good phrasing.
Shape, exactly. So what's something about this specific moment that you think would genuinely surprise people in the energy of renewables?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe it's not too surprising, but I think it's just how hard it is to project things like this happening. Like I said, a handful of years ago, like even 5 to 10, load was projected to be very flat. And now all anyone is talking about in the entire industry is just load growth, load growth, load growth, load growth. Same thing, when we entered this industry 7 years ago, for very logical reasons, both, environmentally as well as just economically, like gas and kind of fossil fuels were pretty much dead in terms of demand. But, I was just at a conference with a bunch of utilities the other day and they were all joking, like, who would have thought 5 years ago that, we would all be grasping our hands looking for natural gas pipelines to kind of power these assets? And so, I think it's just always important to recognize and remember that these things are really hard to predict. This industry, energy, is very funny because in certain ways, I think 99% of people do not think about the energy grid like ever. It's just one of those things you take for granted and it kind of is slow and is just sort of there, but also at the same time has like some of the most intense like day-to-day impacts on your life as well. So yeah, just the unpredictability of what is sometimes seen as, I guess, kind of like a pretty boring, quote unquote, industry, or just something that you only really know. And yeah, just how often things change continues to surprise me.
Agree. The natural gas point is definitely surprising, especially given how just a few years ago, as you were saying, gas was widely viewed as a being out of the way, kind of on the way out.
Totally, yeah. And again, same thing. It's like in the same way all the projections 5 years ago showed load flat. Like every single projection you saw was like renewables with a big hockey stick up into the right, gas and every fossil fuel plummeting down into the right. And then now 5 years later, the renewable grid, the renewable side is kind of slowed down for the moment. Again, to be clear, still extremely bullish on renewables. It's the cheapest energy. It's the most scalable, like, especially solar is here to stay, but it's hitting this little bit of a speed bump, but a speed bump we didn't totally see a couple years ago. And, load now is going up the other direction. And so, yeah, I think it's just really important for us to remember where, yeah, it seems like energy is slow moving and, kind of set it and forget it, but it honestly like has some of the most aggressive, just head spin industry changes of anything I've been. I think I'm in like, I was talking to a colleague that I've known for a while since starting this, where, I still think of myself as pretty young in this industry, only being in here for like 7 years. And I feel like I'm already on the like sort of fourth cycle of new chatter about what is happening. So yeah, good to always make sure that, whether it's us as PVcase or really any company externally, making sure we stay nimble to kind of be able to address whatever the new paradigm is over any time frame.
Exactly. Yeah, this kind of whiplash is definitely a reminder that energy transitions are rarely linear.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it.
So one other thing that you've highlighted is how unusual the mix of players is here. So who's entering this space and why is it so chaotic?
Yeah, it really does feel like the Wild West, honestly. So what's really interesting about this data center one, and a little more so even than renewables, is like it's a few different parties coming into it. So really what we're talking to when we're talking to the industry is there's kind of a few different groups. I kind of bucket them into, you've got your energy folks, you've got your land folks, and you've got your tech folks now trying to do it. So obviously your technology folks, if you will, these are companies that have been doing data centers or, computation already in the past. And this is kind of their bread and butter. But this scale and really having to focus at this scale, like we've talked about, once again, continue to hear that word, is something brand new to them. So they're trying to all figure out, well, how do we do this? Because they're not really energy people and they're not really traditional like land commercial real estate people. So they know this data center and the connectivity side really well, but they kind of lack those other 2 points of the triangle we've been talking about today. But then the other side of it is all of these renewable folks and the energy folks who have been in the energy side of the coin are all seeing this. And like I talked about, saying, hey, these data centers are more similar than not to an energy asset. We know how to develop those really well. Well, we should now go develop these data centers, especially with kind of the renewable industry for at least the moment being a little bit in a slowdown. So now they're all jumping into the pool as well. But for them, they know land decently, just given the land and energy side, and they know power quite well. But they really don't know much about the technology side or the connectivity or how that whole piece works. And then you have your land folks, they've always kind of been in the energy space, commercial real estate and all over, and they know the land side quite well. But in general, that audience isn't quite the most, what I would call like energy technical, if you will. So for them, they both on the generation and load side, we've always talked to that audience about, hey, how do we help them understand the power sides? In the same way, there's the 3 points, connectivity, power, and land. You're kind of seeing a human capital side of that as well, of these different entrants, none of which has the perfect picture. And so that's where we're having a lot of really interesting conversations with the industry right now of they all know certain things better than everyone else, but they also have some gaps. And so they're really looking to say, hey, where can I find a solution that, allows me to double down on what I do well, but really cover these gaps on these parts of it that I just don't know as well. And so, when we're talking to them, we have a different conversation almost every time, depending on what audience we're talking about. So it really just does create this environment where everyone's kind of got an information asymmetry is what we talk about, where it's just everyone has a different, it's like a bunch of vials, if you will, of knowledge. Everyone's got a slightly different mix there, but it creates fun. It's pretty fun kind of being able to help these markets and also learn a lot about what each one does quite well.
You talking about the different audiences made me think that it's kind of like we're all watching the same movie, just some people from different sides of the meter.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. No, I haven't thought of it that way, but that is a very good analogy because it is like, yeah, if you had a screenplay writer, an audio person, and a cinematographer in a room, someone would be looking at the camera angles, one would be looking at the sound, and one would be figuring out like, did the words tie together? And it really is quite similar to that, where it's just everyone kind of has a different level. And then, but then too, it really does help us here at PVcase, where that's what we're here to do. We have been the company that's done the homework, both on the generation, but now the load side, to say, hey, like, we are that one-stop shop. We can cover your gaps. We can allow you to double down. And so, it's really put us in an advantageous position to kind of become quickly, I would argue, the de facto leader at, basically doing project site selection and development for data centers at scale. So that's been a fun strategy for us to work on executing.
For sure. And just before we wrap up, where do you see renewables and storage realistically fit into this picture?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say with storage, battery technology has gotten much, much better. There's long duration batteries, and those can be a really good solution for kind of additional on-site power, allowing these load assets to really generate some energy arbitrage. So it really pairs nicely with these assets. And ultimately with solar, I would say solar is still the cheapest form of energy at scale. And so, yeah, right now, maybe the industry has hit a little bit of speed bumps, if you will, but at the end of the day, as the interconnection challenges, which is the topic of the day in generation, as those continue to get ironed out, like, it will be a scalable way to really meet this load and demand that continues to go up, and, being able to be deployed at cost so that we don't run into these kind of societal cost issues that we talked about a couple times today. So overall, I still see those fitting in very nicely with the overall picture of the data center boom. But like everything in this industry, it's, where the focus is by the day changes. Past 5 to 7 has been really renewables. Things are kind of taking a breather while we get the grid on that side figured out. And now, data centers are the topic of the day. But like I said, formalizing queues and doing that work will kind of put a pause to that shortly. And then likely, if I were to put a projection, it kind of creates this nice, rosy world on the back end of it all, where it all really comes together in a nice, fortuitous fashion across the board.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jake. This has really been an eye-opening conversation. So what's clear is that the data center and AI boom isn't just a tech story. It's fundamentally reshaping how we think about power, planning, and development.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is across the board, changing kind of the entire landscape of the grid, as well as, anyone who works in energy. Pretty much their entire day to day is now kind of flipped and has this whole new component that really hasn't been in the radar. So it has very quickly risen up, I'd say, everyone's focus over time.
Yes, I think for the renewable energy industry, this moment brings both pressure and opportunity. So pressure on grids and timelines, but at the same time, opportunity to rethink how clean energy, storage, and infrastructure all sort of come together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is. And this kind of goes to, it's kind of the same as that triangle we talked about a couple times, and just, you can make that triangle vary, but it is, there's a human side of it. Who are the players in it? There's the economic side. All right, who is cutting the cost? It's the infrastructure side of just, all right, we have to actually build this. There's the power flow side of, all right, how does this energy all move through the grid? So to really land this nicely, it is this it's necessarily a very cohesive picture of how do you get all of these puzzle pieces to fit. And inevitably, like, it's going to take some time, and there are going to be hurdles, there's going to be challenges, but the fact that it has come so quickly with so much demand, it really has been, an exciting gold rush, if you will, to have everyone kind of coming to the table to figure out, all right, how do we as a collective, make this achievable, and circling it one last time, at the scale that we are really trying to shoot for.
Thanks for helping us make sense of this rapidly changing landscape.
Of course. I hope I helped. It is complex. I even, by the day, I definitely lean on our technical people to, help dumb it down for me. But I hope that this was helpful to provide a little bit of a translation, because it is a very complex area where you're focusing on a lot of different, very technical factors. So I do hope that for the audience here, I hope that they got out, and always happy to, chat with anyone.
For sure. So if anyone wants to follow you, Jake, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 easiest ways are email. My email is jake@pvcase.com. So just my first name at pvcase.com. And then on LinkedIn as well. And I have an extremely common name, so I will just go ahead and give the full LinkedIn URL. Otherwise, it could be a little hard to find me. But yeah, it's linkedin.com/in/Jake, B as in boy, Anderson 321. So yeah, linkedin.com and then /Jake B. Anderson 321. Yeah, I check my messages quite well, both on email and LinkedIn. So anyone listening that's interested in data centers, renewables, or anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much, Jake. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to What Matters. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe and share it with someone navigating the same challenges. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. What Matters is powered by PVcase, the platform trusted by solar professionals around the globe. If you never want to miss out on insights that keep solar projects moving forward, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're interested in learning more about streamlining your solar project needs, visit pvcase.com for more info. Until next time.